The Reluctant Pilot. By Sabreman Carter. The Descent. The story so far: a large spacecraft, returning to Earth from a mining colony on Mars, has suffered a major accident whilst on its way back to Earth, which has left all but 2 people dead. One is a crew member, and the other a passenger, going to stay on Earth for the first time. She is the daughter of one of the miners, from the mining colony, and this is her first trip to Earth. Aboard the space freighter Galileo bound for Earth, it's almost the end of the 22nd century. They have had to abandon the mothership. They are returning in a shuttlecraft. They have about 4 days' journey left, and the astronaut has been trying to seduce the female passenger. The astronaut is called Sejanus. Sejanus was tall, good-looking, with blonde hair and blue eyes. He has a muscular frame. He is obsessed with joining the Deep Space Club. He has been doing the Mars to Earth run for at least 10 years. He is almost 30 and still a virgin. Most of the crew of the space freighter were males, and only the gay ones were lucky, and Sejanus wasn't gay. The miners of Mars had families, but even that was out of bounds for him. He wanted a young single female as his girlfriend. He was now regretting his choice of career, because he was never in one place long enough to even form a relationship. The passenger is called Miss Hazel Eyes. Hazel is a fiery redhead, slim figure, early 20s, attractive with a pleasant personality. She is going to Earth to find work, adventure, friendship, and hopefully the companionship of like-minded people. Yes, she is single. She didn't want to marry a miner, and be stuck in the mining community on Mars for the rest of her life. She is intelligent, witty, and resourceful. She can do anything she puts her mind to, and she knows how to get things done. Yes, she wants a boyfriend, but she wants to be able to play the field first, not jump into bed with the first guy who turns up. Sejanus had been chatting her up. She likes him, but does she want to get lumbered with a transient space jockey? The answer to that is no. She wants a reliable guy, but not too flash or boring either. There is a knock on her cabin door. She opened the door to reveal herself, in bra and panties. She was just about to have a shower. The astronaut asks her if he could come in. She said yes. What followed next was an act of violence, as he knocks her to the floor of her room. Being a quick-thinking girl, she realized that it would be futile to struggle with him. He'd told her a few days before that he wanted to join the Deep Space Club. It was not that she did not fancy him, but not like this, and certainly not in this way. She said to him, "Why don't you ask me if you can make love to me?" Straight away he got off her, and began to stand up. She also stood to her feet. "Can I make love with you?" he asks her. She smiles back at him and said yes, but first I have to go to the bathroom and freshen up. Picking up her dressing gown, she covers her near-naked body, and turning away from him, she leaves the cabin to freshen up. Once inside the bathroom, she opens up a small cabinet and takes out a hypodermic needle. This she fills with a measure of something that she takes from a bottle in the cabinet. She places the needle into the pocket of the blue lace dressing gown that she is now wearing. Returning to her room, she finds him, already naked in her bed, waiting for her to return. She removes the dressing gown, and carefully drapes it over a chair at the side of the bed. She removes her bra. She then climbs into the bed next to him. As she does this, she asks him, "Please turn out the light," and as he turns away from her, she takes the needle from inside the pocket of her dressing gown, and she injects the contents of the needle into his flesh. He was asleep before he could turn out the lights. What a pity, she said to herself and giggles girlishly. I was really looking forward to making love with him. Then she pushes his naked body out of her bed. There's a dull thud as his body hits the floor. She smiles to herself, then turned over and went to sleep with him still on her bedroom floor. 4 days later, he was still out for the count when she looked at him. I must have given him too much of that sleeping draught, she said. As she takes hold of the large lever in front of her with both hands, she slowly positions her body into the seat between her legs. She could see the earth far below. through a large dome in the base of the spaceship. She had never done this maneuver before, and she was not looking forward to it now. She could feel the ship rocking gently below her, as it began to descend towards the Earth. Gently, gently, she said. As she eased back on the lever, she knew that she would have to get the angle just right for re-entry. Too sharp, and the ship would burn up in the atmosphere, and too shallow, and they would be bounced off the atmosphere and back into space. She was not looking forward to the prospect of that happening either, plus they were running short of oxygen. Most of the crew members had died in a freak accident aboard the mother ship, on the way back to the Earth. The main hatch had opened, for no apparent reason. Now there was just her and the male astronaut left alive, and he had been put to sleep by her. After the main hatch had blown open, sucking everything that was loose out into space, she had to dress him in his space suit, and had to fasten him into a seat beside her, because he was unable to move himself. She strapped herself into the control seat, ready for the final countdown. She looked at the control panel, as it began to sound the last few numbers: 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. "Brace yourself, girl," she said. As it got to 0, now there was no turning back. The main engine fired up, for one last thrust. The ship now sped towards the planet far below. She could not help wondering if she had done the right thing. She was more than a little worried. As it got nearer to the point of no return, "It's now, or never," she thought out loud, as she held on, for dear life, to that lever. The outer shell of the ship began to burn, as it entered the Earth's atmosphere, and the temperature inside the ship rose as the shell got hotter and hotter. It was also harder for her to control the ship. At that kind of speed, she could see the ground looming up below her. As the ship passed through the atmosphere, suddenly the darkness of space gave way to the light of the planet's surface. The ride was quite a little bumpy at first, as she lost control of the ship for what seemed an eternity but was only in fact 2 or 3 minutes. She began to ease back on the lever, and to her amazement, the front of the ship began to rise up in front of her. Much to her relief, the hardest part of the descent was now over, but she still had to land the craft. She turned on the radio, but there was only crackling noise. "Gemini 195 calling control," she called. There was no reply. Again she called out, "Gemini 195 calling control, come in control." "Where are you, control?" Still nothing was heard. The crackling noise and radio static was now even louder than before. She was still looking for acknowledgement from control, when a red light lit up on the control panel in front of her. She looked at it for a few moments before deciding what to do about it. She picked up the control manual from a drawer in front of her. Red light, what's this red light for?" she said. She found the page marked "Radiation Warning," and from the panel in front of her was able to tell that there had been a massive radiation blast on the planet not long before. She started her final descent to the surface. She said in a loud voice, "Well, kid, we have nowhere else to go now." She was still looking for somewhere to land, when she saw a large object closing in on her, fast, from out of the sky and to the left of her. She turned the ship to avoid a collision, but the object also changed course to match her speed and trajectory. She tried in vain to outmaneuver it, but every time she changed course and speed, it was there with her. It was closing in on her. She had to get the ship as low as possible. Twisting and turning, she headed for the ground, with this thing in hot pursuit of her. She twists and banks sharply left into a gully, with it directly behind her. Then she twists the craft and banks sharply right, and at the same time rolling the craft over in the air, and changing direction yet again, but the other craft was still there in hot pursuit. She found herself heading towards a large overhanging cliff. The other craft was still behind her. It was closing in fast and was even nearer than before. She found herself heading straight for the cliff face. She quickly thought this next maneuver out, and at the last possible moment, too soon and the pursuing craft would be on top of her, and too late she would be sealing their fates. She pulled back the control lever and then throttled it up as hard as she could. the nose of her craft, pulled up with inches to spare of the cliff, as she manages to flip the shuttle back 180 degrees, towards the direction she had just come in on. At that moment the pursuer crashed into the cliff face. Letting out a sigh of relief, as the pursuer exploded behind her, flying lesson number 1, was now over. She had to land this crate, but how? She was still looking for somewhere to put it down. She was looking for a landing beacon. She locked onto the only beacon she could see, operating in the distance, but she does not have enough fuel to make it to the landing field. If she did not set this thing down soon, it would fall out of the sky anyway. What a way to learn how to fly, she thought. Straight ahead, now that's a happy sight below her. She could see a flat field with what looked like a large runway. She pushed the lever forward, and nosed the craft towards the ground. The altimeter read 200 feet, then 175 feet, then finally 150 feet. She is able to level off the ship. At 100 feet, she was gliding down to 75 feet, then 50 feet, finally 25 feet. Trying to get a better position for landing, she cut back the engine revs, then she gently eases back on the lever. The front end of the craft rose in the air slightly. When the shuttle finally touched down, it had bounced up and down a couple of times before coming to a stop on the main road, at the side of what she thought at first was a runway, but turned out to be a large road, somewhere in the middle of a deserted area. She had just used up the last few drops of fuel, getting down safely, but she still did not know where they were, or how far it was to the next town. Her companion was still strapped into his seat. He had been unconscious throughout the descent. She undid her seatbelt and gave him a sip of water. By now, his eyes were open again. Where are we? He asked her. On the planet's surface, she replied. Then she added, we are in trouble. Why, what have you done wrong this time? He asked her. Nothing, and thank you very much for blaming me, she said. It was your fault that hatch flew open on the Galileo. No, it wasn't, he replied, trying to get her to admit to what he thought was her fault. They were still sat inside the ship. Then she told him about the red light, which had come on when she passed over an area of desert and rocks some 2 or 3 hours back. I looked at the manual, she said. And the light says radiation warning. Rubbish, he said. You were looking at the wrong light. What do you mean, wrong light? She answered. He then points over to a bulb marked radiation warning, on the other side of the panel. Thank God for that, she said. But what is this red light for? She asked him. How the hell should I know that, he said, laughing out loud. Well, you're the pilot, she said. Then she went and did something that he wasn't expecting. She kissed him and said, I want to be your girlfriend. He looked at her and said, Wow, now what brought this on, he asked. She said, I want to join the Deep Space Club with you. 2 virgins together, now that should be fun, don't you think? And she smiled at him, and left him speechless. If you want to know what happens next, then you should write it yourself. The question is, how did she know how to fly and land the shuttle? The answer is, by playing computer games on her own PC. Flight simulators can be bought for personal computers. The end.